This is VerDarLuz from Divine Timing Coaching, and I want to welcome you to a presentation here about Pluto in Aquarius. We are here finally. Everyone's talking about it. We have another 20 years ahead of us of this Pluto in Aquarius cycle, and it may be the beginning or the peak of this transition into the next age. So we'll talk a lot about that in this session here today, as well as all of the major themes we think might be erupting volcanically with Pluto into our consciousness. I have a slideshow presentation for you. If you enjoyed this as you're moving through, please like and subscribe. I'm building the channel and would love your support in that as I continue to produce more videos about astrology, human design, and other esoteric and mystical teachings. So let's get into it right now. There will be another video about Pluto through the different signs and affecting the different houses and signs in your chart. So definitely check that out after. Let's get into the video here, slideshow. And we have this question of if we're moving into the shift of the ages. Some of this is coming from a presentation I gave about the astrology of the next decade through the 2020s. And what I think is that we are really at a peak moment of the transition between the ages, because we also have Saturn just going into Pisces, and there's some other video content about that if you want to look on my channel. But it kind of bridges, right, the two ages. We're coming out of the Pisces, the ages move backwards into the age of Aquarius. These are 2,200 year long cycles, and we just had Saturn in Aquarius. And so we have this really interesting moment, in the next couple of years. And when you look at all the cycles in the 2020s, there's so much happening that creates such a catalytic and cathartic shift in our collective consciousness. And it's more around the mid part of this decade. But this year, with Pluto moving into Aquarius, Saturn moving into Pisces, we're looking at a major theme where we have to become very self-aware of ourselves as spiritual beings, having this physical experience, and learning that we are so multidimensional. And how can we navigate daily life, embodiment, connected to spirit or source, God, however we want to call that force that gives us life and breath every day. We have to stay connected to that energy. And we have to recognize that we can no longer project someone out there to save us or to redeem us, as in the Piscean age, or that we are moving, into someone to blame or lay guilt on, right? That this is who made it wrong. Like, the whole binary thing of like Republicans and Democrats, and that whole dichotomy between the left and the right and all of that. That is not at all what the Aquarian age is about. The Aquarian age is about moving into a realm where we step out of the stories, because Aquarius is the water bearer, and so we're not in the ocean of competing mythologies and storylines, which is Pisces. Yes, Pisces can be the unitive field. That's its highest vibration. And that's what we want to exercise while Saturn is in Pisces over the next couple of years. But within that, we lose boundary, and then we start to project onto the other. And this is what I have to be very careful of over the next couple of years, projecting blame, guilt, all of that, and salvation and redemption. And instead, really going into ourselves and having that mystical experience with our source every day, in every moment, in everyone we meet, recognizing God consciousness everywhere, all the time. That's a real spiritual practice, right? We could have moments of awakening and these sort of peak moments, right? Maybe it's a psychedelic or entheogenic experience. Maybe it's a meditation, right? Maybe it's a moment with your child that wakes you up to something beyond. It could be a creative process, but what we need to do is sustain that. And sustaining that awakening process is the real work. And so while Pluto moves into Aquarius, The journey now is going to be to find those communities that we can, those collectives that we can actively contribute to. Remember that the opposite sign of Aquarius is Leo, and Leo means I am a creator. I am a spark of the creator, and I must give all of myself to creating the Aquarian ideals, to contributing to these communities, these tribes that I'm a part of, that I affiliate with. And as I give to that, I receive from it. And so we're going to keep finding ourselves in more different, exotic, experimental communities and community building in ways we haven't before. And a lot of that because systems are going to continue to break down. That's been what we've seen in Pluto and Capricorn since 2008, right? And it's so interesting to note that in 2008, when Pluto moved into Capricorn, and then just this last couple of weeks, March of 2023, we have these banking crises, right? One of the biggest banks, Silicon Valley Bank, goes under, another bank goes under. We will expect that there will be other major economic crises, a complete shift coming of currency and how we work with that, likely very digital. But we're going to have a different relationship with the value that we never have had really in the last couple hundred years. And it may be around things like the dollar and how we exchange and how we share our resources. Aquarius is in this axis with Scorpio, Taurus, and Leo. And every one of those signs has to do directly with money. And, Taurus is like resources, material things, the basic necessities, shelter, all of that, food, right? Gardens. Scorpio is big business, control, power, wealth structures, can definitely be banking, definitely, governmental institutions that hold power, but shared investments, right? Where we put our money in our bank, it's somewhere else, right? Or dividends, that kind of, all of that is very Scorpionic. Leo money is more about the creative work that I do to earn money myself as a leader. But Aquarius is also like collective communities that and how we distribute money around the collective. And it's so important under Aquarius to equalize the playing field, right? In Aquarius, it isn't that you're like a Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or anyone else that's like a multi-billionaire, and you're bigger and better than anyone else. Something is going to happen with these major wealthy types that will level the playing field. Maybe we'll see more and more of those in wealth and power just be completely like ostracized, right? Or put out in certain terms of like certain corruptions that are happening, and people won't stand for it in the way that they have before. And so let's look at some of the other themes here. So Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto is by itself the force in our consciousness, in our psyche, of transformation. We use that word very seriously because with a Pluto process that you go through on an individual level, we're talking about a 3-year process. And so if you've been a Capricorn, right, or Cancer, you've been going through this last 10, 12 years. But transformation means I die to one form and I become something else. Like the caterpillar doesn't have any idea what a butterfly is, right? But it's willing to surrender to the mystery. And that's our most important process with Pluto. So the death process, the devastation, the destruction, the catharsis is very much like the god Shiva, actually, in the Hindu tradition, or the feminine version like Kali, right? And part of what this is really, as you study these gods and goddesses more, is Kali is like, holding the head of, Shiva or her partner, basically. And it's basically the idea of slicing away the ego, right? And what's not true, which is, that we are some individual self that is this egoic, I being. Well, this is not real. And so the whole concept of that separated self is going to come up more and more for us. How we do try to separate, how we try to return, and the need for community, right? Now, Pluto can also promise rebirth, but as what, right? And this is the question. And this is what we have to be willing to create, through this process. Pluto in evolutionary astrology is known as the source of, like we could say the bottom line of the unconscious desires in the soul. And we all have these sort of shadow parts, right? Or these unconscious elements, or these repeating, as Freud called the repetition compulsion, these repeating themes that come up again and again and again, often in very like distorted ways if we don't bring them into the consciousness, right? And so we have to be willing to work with the shadow like very consistently through our communal experiences. And this is actually peaking right away because Pluto is squaring the nodes in the sky, which are where the eclipses happen. And this is anytime a planet squares the nodes, that planet, that consciousness force inside of us, that teacher, that archetype, it goes through a kind of evolutionary test. And Pluto is already the god of evolution, right? Because an old form needs to die off, an old skin needs to be shed, and then a new form needs to be born. So this whole year, Pluto's squaring the nodes, and there is some big evolutionary test that all of us will be going through. A lot of it will have to do with how we relate to the situations of, a lot of catharsis and change and transition for all of us. And probably this has to do with things like resources, because we're talking about this axis of, the first degree of those signs, Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio, and Leo, all having to do with resources in some way. So wherever you're at right now with some, soul piece, right? It may be that you're needing to do some soul integration, some shamanic soul recovery, right? Soul retrieval. It may be ceremonial work, medicine work. It may be breath work. It may be the study of esoteric and, occult information, astrology, human design, unconscious patterns in the family constellation, IFS, all these different tools, deeper somatic work. This is key for the evolution right now. And so whatever's coming up while Pluto's squaring the nodes, it's mandatory that we do this work. And this is the Pluto process. Is Pluto forces the issue, right? And you can't not say yes. You must. So surrender and grace through that. And actually this can be quite a very spiritual cycle, because a lot of times we don't reach out to God or our source unless we're suffering. And there's something kind of beautiful. I mean, the different texts talk about this in different ways, the scriptures, but it's like God or our source is like waiting for us to reach, waiting for us to pray, right? And we don't have to wait, until we're in crisis. But there's probably a crisis that you are going through. We're all going through some kind of crisis right now. And this is the Pluto square the nodes. How are we going to evolve? What kind of perception are we going to bring to this? The Stoics speak a lot about, not focusing on the externals of life, right? Like I can't control that situation out there. What I can control is my own relationship or my reaction to what's happening. And this is where I can build my character and my integrity. And that's going to be really important through this process, especially this year. Now, for you personally, there, again, if you have planets over, in Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, especially the first degree, that's going to be very active this year, next year. And of course, it will just continue over the next 20 years. The degrees will increase. But Pluto actually will stay in Capricorn some of this year. So he's still hovering around that last degree of the cardinal signs: Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn. So very sensitive degrees, 29 and 1. And those are important degrees in astrology. They're called the anaretic degrees. And the anaretic is like, the 29th is like the culmination moment. And that's why you have usually big endings or kind of like big crises moments, or kind of like the end point, right? This is like perfect in some way as a symbol. We have these, double bank collapses, right? I mean, banking, big power, big money, big wealth is very Pluto, especially the last degree of Capricorn. The first degree is like, this is where we get a hint of where we're moving towards, right? And this year is going to be like a big, like, window into where are we emerging in the next 20 years? And, but there's also like a lot of naivete. And sometimes there could be like a lot of confusion of how we're going to navigate this new archetype, right? Because what Pluto does is bring death to the old version of that archetype, right? So death to the old Aquarius and birth of the new, right? Pluto and Capricorn, the death of the old systems, the old institutions. I mean, look at what's happened with the governments around the world and the corruption in the US, in England, everywhere, with things like the management of resources, with the police and the whole corrections, and the corruption in that industry. This is what's going to happen with Aquarius, and this is why, as we go through these different points, we're going to see things like technology being a big one, like AI and robotics, like mass systems of the populace. So let's move forward. If you are in your mid-30s, you will be experiencing the Pluto square, 36 to 38. So that happens for all of us. And it's everything we're talking about today with Pluto, right? It's a time in your life where you're doing a lot of shadow work and you're going into the depths of your soul. And there's a lot of inner work to do to release. Pluto, one of Pluto's big words is release, right? Regeneration as well. So let's start with this theme of freedom. Aquarius is a sign, again, as we said, the water bearer. It's stepping out of the oceans of kind of mythologies and, storylines that we've told ourselves about who we are, and saying, no, actually, we can write our own story, right? And we can do that through the communities that we associate with, the affiliations, people that share and create a similar ideal together. And like we said, equality becomes very important here. And so as this cycle unfolds, we're going to see more and more social justice, more and more protests on the street, more rebellions, more nonconformity, more, diversification of communities and beings, and people not wanting to be put into boxes. Obviously, we've seen this hugely in Pluto and Capricorn with transgenderism, and that's going to increase, right? And the rights that are needed for everyone. That's going to be prominent during this cycle. We can absolutely bet on that, as well as, of course, women's rights for every ethnicity. Where this is not happening, there will be big protests and issues coming up. And you're going to see also, as we've been seeing, the shifting of the job market. Less and less labor. We saw how COVID moved a lot of people out of a workspace, planted the seed of like, why am I going into any place and not being at home? Or why can't I be a digital nomad and travel around the world and still do my computer-based job, right? And digital nomadism is a very, very strong and emerging and upsurging kind of force in the world. You could also call it remote work, right? People want, remember this freedom concept of Aquarius is, it's not like I don't want to work, right? Well, and some people don't. and some people are finding again, there's just going to be endless eccentric ways of earning money, like there are now, right? Some of the biggest websites on YouTube are about, how to hustle in this area or that area to earn money in these very unique ways, right? That that are pretty experimental, and you can earn tons of money. So there is a lot of innovation coming with this. But the whole gig economy, right? Things like Fiverr or Upwork, where you would develop a skill set, or 3 or 4 or 10, right? Because one isn't usually going to make it in Pluto and Aquarius. We need to be constantly learning. This is an air sign, experimenting. There's going to be new technologies we always have to adopt and adapt to. And we're kind of, always finding new clients, new work. And part of this too is going to be based on the fact that, so much work is becoming automated. And it was like, some blue collar jobs, a lot of like factory type of work, of course, but now a lot of white collar, or, jobs that we thought humans would have to do. Like, this is where we start to talk about AI, right? And we talk about ChatGPT and different softwares that are allowing us to, yes, have more freedom as a creator. But what we're learning about is how do I prompt the machine, right? How like, that's the thing with ChatGPT, is like you have to know how to ask the right question, right? And so this kind of, how do I start to like build this like relationship with my AI? And this is where, again, more personal assistants that are AI based, that's going to become very common. Look at the movies like AI, Minority Report, maybe bits of Terminator, a little bit extreme, but we are going to see a lot more of that deep interaction between us and our AI. I mean, some of the art you're going to see in the slideshow I made with Midjourney, but it's like I half made it, it half made it, right? The AI, because I had to give certain prompts in certain ways, and then I had to like tweak it, right? And so then the question is sort of like this bigger question around who we are becoming as humans more and more, because we are becoming more machine-like every day. I mean, I've written poems and, ranted quite a bit about how much of my life, especially living abroad a lot, was like filling in passwords everywhere. And like, think about the fact that like, this is very important that, if, let's say you have cryptocurrency, or let's say something would happen and there's an accident and you need to, maybe if you die perhaps, but all of your money is locked behind passwords, right? Have you saved those passwords? Do your parents know about that, or your children know about that? How are they going to get in? Do you have like 30 passwords to all these different accounts? And I mean, just like a decade ago, we didn't think this way, right? We have to think more like we are algorithms, and we're being treated like algorithms. And everything that YouTube suggests to you is an algorithm. And it's all based off of your patterns, right? So you're a pattern in a system. There is a really great documentary. I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but I watched it there about a year ago, and I think it's called Source Code. No, that's a movie, but it's something about the code. It's something with code in the title, and it's extremely good about algorithms and how algorithms are choosing, us like for jobs, or even if like that application is, if you'll get a call back or not. It's based off all these factors, right? That very few of us are privy to, and this is something we have to really start questioning the ethics of, right? So we'll get into that a little bit more here, but there's also going to be more and more the urgency around climate change. Aquarius unites us as a humanity and as a biosphere, as a collective Gaia realm that we live in. And I recommend the film Legacy. It's on Amazon. Extremely important around this. Also, the latest David Attenborough film, that was all about what happened during COVID and how different species started to come back to life, started to inhabit the oceans and the realms that they had been basically forced out of because of humans. We're going to see more and more how humanity is a lot of times really like a cancer to this earth. And we're going to have to take some serious action around climate change. And there may be more and more masses rising up, and it may be on a very survival level. Obviously, extreme weather is going to continue to factor into this. You have situation like in Europe this winter with very little snow. What that does, the rising seas, a couple degrees and the whole planet, goes under. And that's what Legacy talks about in this very kind of poetic and tragic type of way. But we need to pay attention to this. And as we talked about these different companies and AI, robotics, being everywhere, really, and the pros and cons of that, right? Like improving our lives on some levels, but then, a decrease of labor, maybe a lot of people having less jobs. So, we're going to have this ethical relationship with our AI and our robotics. Virtual living, remember this is an air sign. I mean, Aquarius is known, maybe with Gemini, as the two most technological signs. And so, we're having this sort of interesting moment where a lot of us have been losing our emotional body. Air signs move very fast. And so the more people you're connected with, the more communities you're connected with, the phone and the computer and the tablet and the Amazon Fire and the Alexa and all these things that so many of us are tethered to, we move very quickly through that, like a circuit board, right? And it starts to frazzle us. And we start to lose some of that sort of compassionate nature. We start to lose some of that emotional body. And you see this, unfortunately, in the Gen Z and the younger generations who have a lot of trouble, like accessing their emotions in conversation, looking at people in the eye, even asking, people out for dates or breaking up with them. It's happening through texting, like whole relationships can happen through the phone, right? It's a very different world. And we need different tools for that, right? And so there is a kind of potential disembodiment that can happen with this. And living through the machines and through the computers and the media and the video games, we start to disembody more and more. And so, how do we, through this process, how do we stay embodied, appreciate the body, enjoy, that Taurus square, the sensuality of eating really well and, working out and hiking and touch and massage and, all of these ways that we connect through the body. Because more and more technologies will sort of take us to transcending the body, especially as we get more and more into VR and AR, augmented reality. And we're going to have more appeal to be there. And there is like sometimes this picture, right? Like if our life is, if we have less resources and we don't have a lot of money, and then we have these beautiful worlds we can inhabit virtually, then it can be very appealing to stay there, right? And so we have to be really careful of that. And again, the whole like gender question being very, lots of fluidity happening during this Pluto and Aquarius. And as we said, this Aquarius rules the nervous system and sort of the electricity through our system, right? And so as a theme, it rules trauma. And that trauma, a lot of that happens from disembodying. It's like if a mass trauma is happening, like part of you has to check out to survive. And so we're going to need a lot more tools lot more therapies, like, the emergence of more psychedelic therapy is beautiful, and maybe a great expression of Pluto and Aquarius, that we finally get into this being more accepted, more embraced, and that helps to liberate us. Liberation is an Aquarian theme. But we're going to need a lot more therapy collectively. Also, especially as Saturn's in Pisces the next couple of years, which can bring a lot of depression if we don't have that spiritual connection, consistently in our life. It can bring people into a lot of questioning of what for in their existence. And, again, we have to be very careful to not, a lot of people have been canceling or getting rid of certain social media accounts, because this can bring a sense of like, I can never get enough, right, of my likes, or like checking the email, like dopamine rush of Facebook scrolling, and these kind of like trigger points through social media. And there is a movement. There's someone named Cal Newport that you might want to check out, digital minimalism. He doesn't actually have any social media accounts. He's quite a well-known author. He has a podcast, but talks a lot about becoming less available. And it's interesting, right? Because we're talking about Aquarius and building all these communities, and how do we become less available through that? But I do think that one of the rebellions that will happen is more and more people will sense their own anxiety from being so integrated into these virtual realms, that they will start to unplug. And, we're going to have to look at, again, this healthy, ethical relationship to social media and technology. And we know that social media is, whether it's, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or, TikTok for sure, how the algorithms are put there to keep you addicted, right? And it's basically like a slot machine. And they've used slot machines as their basis for a lot of how the technology works. And, this is partially why these different companies have been brought under, the courts. And, we all have to become very responsible to how we relate to this, and recognize what's happening by spending so much time there. And there are these higher vibrational shifts that we can expect with Pluto and Aquarius. I mean, Aquarius is a sign of, energy itself moving through the system and moving through consciousness. And, we could expect that there are other forces, and we'll get to this in a moment, but there are alignments happening with levels and dimensions of being that, few of us have access to, maybe through our dreams, maybe through our visionary psychedelic experiences, through our meditations, or if we're more psychically attuned. Well, over the next 20 years, this is going to become a lot more common, that we're going to be able to tune into these other vibrations, these other dimensions, and these other beings that are always here with us. And some of us may not be able to handle that vibration. And so we could see Pluto as, as a symbol of death, that bringing death to certain groups of people in Aquarius, group consciousness, people that aren't able to be at this vibration on this planet as the vibration of the whole planet is changing. So that is also a possibility. Disclosure of alien intelligences, extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, interdimensional, very various terms for, all the possibilities here. This should become pretty obvious by the end of this cycle. And there may be whole new pieces around our origins as a species. There's lots of stories around this. Maybe there's going to be other findings at different archaeological sites. There could be, there could be mass sightings and events happening, or just a lot more awareness of already how much of that is happening, a lot more people channeling, and astrobiology, the science of life on other planets or on exoplanets, or even, on the moons of planets. Like, we have big missions going to Europa, Jupiter's moon. There's, of course, Enceladus, Triton, Neptune's moon, Enceladus, and Saturn. These are places that maybe Titan that we think could harbor life. There's water there, frozen ice. So what will we discover in the next 20 years? Likely that life is everywhere. How does this change our story and our relationship? And do we actually start to inhabit space during this time? It really makes sense under the Aquarian idea. I mean, Aquarius rules the stars in a lot of ways. So if you also look at, we talked about the power of algorithms and passwords, and cybersecurity being a major area here, and how we will protect ourselves during this process, how we become sovereign, in things like our banking. And a lot of us got into cryptocurrency because we thought, I want to take control of my resources. And in fact, a lot of us lost tens of thousands, hundreds, millions of dollars because of corruption within those communities. And this is the thing, right? Pluto can rule corruption in those Aquarian communities. Right? Now, these can also be transformative and empowering communities. So how do we relate as an individual within a community, and what do we align ourselves to? Speak more about this in a moment, but again, how far will we go with putting technology into our body, right? It may be very appealing for medical purposes, but we're going to start more and more with the glasses that will be projecting augmented reality, maybe the internet right here, the ability to have the Neuralink that Tesla talks about. I'm sorry, that that Tesla owner talks about. I'm blanking right now. I'll get back to it. But anyway, we'll have this potential, right? And I don't want to make an exact prediction here, but where technology could be fed directly into our brain. And again, some of this could be very beneficial. Maybe it's going to help with Alzheimer's or, dementia, right? This would be incredible. And we think that neuroscience, right? Aquarius rules the nervous system. It rules the brain in a lot of ways. It's all electricity happening there. So neuroscience should grow exponentially. There will be tons of scientific discoveries here. And there may even be free energy technologies that are emerging, right? Things that Tesla proposed, Nikola Tesla proposed over 100 years ago, right? But then they got shut down by the powers that be, right? And so, the power that we use, things like coal, like this is power not for the people. It's by a handful of people, power elite, wealthy people. But we're going to see the need for and the creation of more and more like community generated power, living off the grid, off grid, using wind and solar and renewable energies, and maybe again, technologies that we don't even know, the creation of more and more eco villages and sustainable communities, especially you think of more like regional economies. So, the US has been going through its Pluto return. It's pretty much ending, this year, but it's not like, okay, that was it, now it's over. It's like, what is the fallout of that? And it's interesting that we go into an election year in the US in 2024. We all know that election years are extremely spicy, very difficult, challenging, polarizing often, and lots of intense energy on the streets and all over. And especially we can see that likely it seems Donald Trump will be going for the presidency again. And we can imagine, right, that this will be quite ugly in some ways. And so the fallout of this, we could see these breakups of certain parts of this country, right, in a big way. What's interesting, if we project out, the only time that the US was in the Civil War was when Neptune was in Aries. Well, Neptune will move into Aries in 2025, 2026. Exact 2026. Saturn and Neptune enter the first degree, the Aries point, which some of you may know is known as a very critical degree of the zodiac because it's the beginning of the spring season. It's the beginning of the entire astrological year. It's the first moment, really. So when you have both Saturn and Neptune at that first degree, we can imagine some major event collectively, major, unprecedented. It could be warlike, but it's something that will affect the collective consciousness on a very deep level. And again, we can always go back to those previous cycles, and we'll do that with this Pluto and Aquarius cycle at the end here. But it's something to really look towards, right? That we're moving towards this quite a big crisis moment. There's some other big transits around 2026 that look like, 25 and 26 are a lot more challenging on some levels than 23 and 24. And so, yes, the idea of regional economies, that we maybe split up the US more and more, even if it doesn't, completely like, if you don't have states completely seceding, although some of them might, you might have a lot more regional and then local economies and social structures building up, so that there's less and less federal involvement in what's happening with, local and state issues. And so you have, of course, like regions, right? Like if you look at the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of cohesion between what they stand for and what, the progressive elements up there, that type of thing. You look at the Southeast, right? If you look at the Northeast, if you look at some of the mountainous zones, so there's there's already these built-in regions, and you might see a lot more of this sort of regional autonomy being asked for. So this is something to consider. Regulation of the internet and technology as well. As you have more and more issues coming up around security, as people question, is China using TikTok to actually study us and kind of spy on us? You can read tons of articles about this, right? Besides, of course, the addictive and the attention deficit disorder that comes from scrolling, and you only have 6 seconds, right, to get somebody's attention. What is that doing to us, hey, to our ability to focus? How many of us have lost the ability to sit and read a book for hours at a time? Because we've learned how to scroll, we've learned how to open hundreds of tabs at once, and that's whatever we do, we repeat and we keep doing. So, so we talked about this minimalism. The freedom to travel comes up because Aquarius has an air sign, the ability to travel at will. Do some things, do power structures try to control this? Do we have to, of course, we just went through this, right? When Saturn was in Aquarius the last couple of years with COVID, is that a sign of something to come with Pluto there? Is there some kind of new kinds of international laws around travel? Is it something about maybe the footprint, right? The amount of energy we're using by traveling. I mean, I haven't been on a plane. I've been traveling quite a bit in the last few years, and it's like they're always booked, like they're always full. And it wasn't like that when I started traveling like 20 years ago, 22 years ago. And the carbon footprint is huge with that, and maybe something along the lines of that comes up. But the air, right? And the social system itself, the economic system, there's probably some massive collapse coming with this, that requires a complete new way of, like a new social contract for us. Is it about currency? Is it how we use it? Is it the end of the US dollar? Highly likely. Is it a digital currency? This can be quite scary on a lot of levels because if a digital currency is controlled by governments, then we can be watched all the time. This is also happening already in China. What's the future of crypto? Is it over? Is it just in a moment? Is it going to be always tied into the dollar and to the Wall Street and the markets, or is there another alternative coming? We saw a lot of corruption in that the last couple of years, and so we have to question, what alternatives are there, right? And this again comes back to local resourcing with each other, trade, barter. Maybe that becomes a lot more popular, more barter fairs regularly, potlatches as the indigenous people had them. And yeah, expectation of more bank failures, taxation revolts. U.S. is the only country in the world that taxes its citizens who don't live there. And this can become maybe more of an issue as more people leave the U.S., and maybe they're just going to give up their passports, or, there is a mass exodus happening. But what is this? Is this fair? Is this equal? Is this, if I'm not using those resources, why am I paying into them? These are important questions. And this is what created the U.S. to begin with, because we had, of course, England, Britain, taxing those on the U.S. soil. It wasn't the U.S. yet, but there wasn't the same kind of representation happening. And so we could see issues around this same type of thing around the entire world. And that where there is corruption, there will be more and more, revolution, protest. So let's look at last few themes here. Airborne diseases. This is potential with Pluto and Aquarius, because Aquarius rules the air. Of course, we've just come out of this horrific moment with the pandemic, but we have to prepare ourselves for more and different types of toxic air elements going on. Maybe this is part of the outpouring of the age that we've been coming from, so much with industrialization and the fallout of that. And so the relationship to clean air, clean water, our relationship to basic resources, are we going to have access to them? And this is something that might become more and more threatened, right? And so how can we align with communities and with our own day in, day out lives where we are growing our own food, where we have access to spring water, where we're doing all those things to take as much self-reliance as possible? And we talked about neuroscience. I want to speak for a moment about in the US, Medicaid and prisons. Some of you may know that a lot of people signed up for Medicaid during the pandemic, and up to 80 million people potentially will not have access by next month, because the laws are changing. The companies that have had to give medical support to those who signed up no longer have to do this. That's a lot of people. That's like almost a third of the population. This is also a sign of the Pluto return of the U.S., of the economy here going down more and more, as more and more people have less access to resources, including basic resources like medical care. This is not true in Europe. This is not true in places like Portugal and Spain, and a lot of places I've traveled to, obviously the Scandinavian countries. There's a lot more social welfare there. Yes, people pay higher taxes in some of the places in Scandinavia, yes, but they're getting supported. They don't have to think about not having medical care when they need it, right? And in some places, a hospital visit will cost you, $20, not $2,000. This is very serious, right? And I want to speak to the prison system for a moment. I've just been learning a lot about this. And when you think about Aquarius, and freedom and egalitarianism, one of the areas that is the least the least conscious and the most controlling is the prison system. And I want to give you a couple stats, because when I learned this, I started to feel that kind of revolutionary spirit in myself, and a lot of sadness, because prisoners are people, and most of them are in prison because they weren't educated properly, and they have not had they've been disadvantaged. They have not had the exposure to how to live a life of compassion, of giving, of building out their talents. A lot of them are extremely in poverty and are just trying to survive. And that's because the system is corrupt and people don't have what they need. But let's check this out for a moment. 5% of the population is in the US, in the whole world. 25% of the people in jail in the world are in the US. 5% of the total population, but 25% of the world's jailed people are in the US. It's the most jailed country in the world. Since 1970, prisons and their population have risen 700%. Really? Like that many more people are doing crimes? 1990, corporations really started to privatize the prison, what we call the prison industrial complex. And let's look at the fact that African Americans and Hispanics comprise 58% of all prisoners, but only 25% of the US population. Obviously, profiling is huge. 1 in 6 Black men have been incarcerated up to 2021. 1 in 6. Prison is a growing industry, meaning between 1990 and 2010, in those 20 years, the number of privately operated prisons grew by 1,600%. 1,600. Why? Because this is kind of like slave labor. It's cheap labor. Over half of the profits from these holding facilities are from undocumented immigrants. So it really pays to jail immigrants and force them to work for nothing. The contracts with the government that these corporations have, these corporations demand a minimum occupancy level of 90%. 90%. And these contracts that they have, with the prisons, guarantee that the occupancy rates stay at this level, or the government will have to pay for the open beds. So there's almost like a quota, like a mandate, like we have to keep the prisons full. Well, what is that going to do? That means we're going to arrest people unlawfully. And we're going to keep them in there. And we have to keep them in there, or we don't have jobs. So do we want to rehabilitate them? No, we don't. Now, there are a lot of programs that are developing, and this is where I think we can go with this once we hear these horrendous statistics, like art therapy, music therapy, even the artist Common. Some of you may know Common. He's opened a program for inmates. Also philosophy classes and even higher education classes. These are being offered more and more now, and because they see the value of it. But it has so much to do with who's making the decisions, and if they're not heavily invested in corporate backing for their prisons and their jails. So, but there is a movement, right, to rehabilitate. most of these prisoners will get out of jail and they will be on the streets. And we need to give them tools, right, to be integrating in society, to contributing to it, to learning from it, to, giving to it in a healthy way. And that's why we need rehabilitation in the prisons. And I think this is a very Pluto and Aquarius concept, right? So let's talk about, lastly, the last few cycles. There was the Protestant Reformation that happened between 1532 and 1552. The corruption in the Catholic Church, the sort of hierarchy of the Pope making all the decisions. You can look into this more, but there was this whole situation with King Henry in England during this time where, he wanted a divorce from his wife and he wanted to be with this other woman, and the Pope wouldn't do it. And so he was like, you know what, screw you. I'm going to create a law that you don't have any power anymore. And this basically made Protestantism spread all over England. It gave no power to the Pope and the Catholic Church anymore, but it also gave King Henry like all kinds of power, and it sort of consolidated the power in the monarchy. So this is dangerous, right? Because it speaks to dictatorialism. Now, there was many other things going on during those times, but this is a lot easier to look at, right? 1778 to 1796. Well, we just had the French and American revolutions. And then, like we said, the fallout of that, right? Just like we have the Pluto return and the fallout of that happening at the same time for the US. So the first US presidency came. And again, this was a complete social upheaval. It was complete rewriting of what it was to, the Declaration of Independence, right? Very, very Aquarian term, gets embraced as a collective ideal in the US. And so we have the sort of the ends of monarchy in some way, or, the test around what rulership and leadership really is. Ideally, Aquarius is extremely democratic. And so we might see that the disbanding of anything that feels dictatorial, corruptive in the governments. And that's what we would hope, right? So we shall see. Last couple points here. Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in 2024. This should bring a lot of innovation and acceleration technologically. So we should see that, again, Pluto will be fully in Aquarius in 2024, that there should be a pretty rapid, something big in 2024 technologically. And then we talked about the Saturn-Neptune Aries point coming. I think a great shift this decade is going to be once Uranus moves into Gemini. And this is going to be around 2026 to 2033. And this is because during this time, 2027, 28, Uranus will be trining Pluto. And that should really accelerate the technology. Look at what happened the last times Uranus was in Gemini. You could see here a lot of self-reflection. Existentialism was really strong. Sartre, Camus. It was post-World War II. And what you had was the first electronic computer built. And what does that look like in terms of VR and AR and what's coming? The first supersonic flight and round-the-world flight. Again, we do think that flight and our ability to move around this planet, something is going to happen to make that a lot faster. Holography came, 3D images. Of course, we have this happening with 3D printing, and this will become more ubiquitous. Also really important, UFO, Roswell incident, and sort of the collective awareness around these other beings. And it speaks to what we spoke to before. The first man-made object reached space. So you get, again, the whole space travel idea coming in very strong. And if you go back to 1606, then you have telescope, thermostat, and microscope invented. Now, Pluto allows us to see into and farther away at the same time. See that? Microscope and telescope. right? So Pluto is like, you didn't know this existed. Now you can see into this. Now you can see farthest away, right? And think about what's happening with the James Webb telescope, going back to the Big Bang, some of the, the best images that we've had, the oldest images that we've had. So again, our sense of identity as a collective, as a universal being changes hugely. The Orion Nebula was discovered. And some of you may know that there's a lot of theories that we come from the Orion Nebula. The nebula is the birthplace of stars. The Mayans speak to this. There's whole kinds of galactic cosmologies around what happened in Orion, the war that took place there. So there is something coming with these transits. And I'd say, just kind of in summary, that this is going to be an extremely powerful time, as you can tell, right? That Uranus, Pluto trine will maybe be a peak moment this decade, but that Pluto in Aquarius is really to transform the collective in so many different ways. And each of us are going to be contributing to that process. Remember that Leo opposition, right? What can I create in the world that I want to live in and experience and share with others? And so I invite you to stay committed to your creative process during this time, to continue to know yourself and understand your patterns, very important for Aquarians, using astrology, human design, all these other tools, these languages of self-discovery. If I can support you in that, please let me know with contacting me below. Every month I do discounted consultations if it's the month and you are moon, sun, rising. So this month, when this is coming out, would be Aries. So Aries, moon, sun, rising. And please like and subscribe to the video. I really appreciate that as I build my channel and continue to share this work with more people. If you found this really instructive, stay tuned for Pluto and Aquarius for all the signs through all the houses, how it will affect you over the next 20 years. And it's been wonderful to share this with you today. All the best. Namaste.